Hey everybody, what's up? It's Tools from Next Level CCG, um, Next Level CCG on YouTube and Twitch. Just want to do a quick video discussing Pro Tour Rivals of Ixalan, which was this past weekend. I know we're about 6 days late to the party, but this is the time frame I had, and this is the time frame I'm working on. I don't usually do too many vlog style videos, but I wanted to do one anyways and discuss the modern metagame and the top decks from this Pro Tour as it was modern, and that's the format that I definitely play the most of. That's the format I grind in a lot. Um, Play mostly in paper, pretty much all I have in paper Magic. Play a lot on MTGO and all that. So just wanted to go over the top decks, do a quick little breakdown, and talk about some numbers, and try to figure out if there's any overpowered decks. I know the banning announcement was right after the Pro Tour, so it's going to be February 12th, which is about a week from today. So should anything be banned? Should stuff not be banned? But stuff unbanned, etc. But just to start quickly, go over some of the Pro Tour results, just so it's out there and kind of a little bit of a discussion on what my opinion was of the Pro Tour and some of the decks and stuff like that. So anyways, I'm just going to start by doing a little intro here. Going into the Pro Tour, a lot of people had thought there'd be kind of a breakout deck or two where people basically saw the pros breaking the metagame, similar to what happened right before I really started playing a lot, which was, I guess, Eldrazi took over the format for a little while. We didn't get that this time with the Pro Tour. The decks were very evenly spread out. In fact, 30 different decks had winning records, which is pretty phenomenal when you think about it. It wasn't a huge field of entrants for the Pro Tour. I think there was like 300 or so players, something to that extent. Of course, it's an invite-only kind of event, but it's what some of the best Magic players in the world are playing in. So it's interesting to see what decks they're playing and that sort of deal. There were 7 different decks in the top 8. Pretty good diversity there. It really showed this event, if anything, that even though your deck may not be the strongest or the most powerful deck, if you can grind and you can really focus on a specific deck and try to learn the in and outs and basically learn the deck to its entirety, you can do really well, as a couple people in the top 8 showed, who are really good Magic players that are really good pilots of their decks, and they knew what the deck could do and what it couldn't do. Another interesting fact is that no deck was higher than 10% of the metagame, which is pretty good. Modern for a while now has been a format where there's not a deck that's over 10% in the metagame. You'll see a period here and there where decks get played a little more higher than usual and they drop down a lot. They go back and they drop down. Tron is a good example of that. Sometimes it's up there on the metagame, which it is now. It's probably one of the most played decks in the format. And then, you'll see it in the next month. It'll drop down and it'll be back to its like 2% meta range from like 8% where it's at now. So first thing I'm going to do is just break down the metagame a little bit from the Pro Tour. The number one most played deck was 5-color humans. Not really a surprise to me. It's a deck that's really risen in popularity just over, I don't know, the past 2 to 3 months or so. Somebody kind of figured out to play 5 colors in it, play Aether Vial in it, violin creatures, and just kind of overwhelm the board. The printing a Kite Sail Freebooter, which is one of the cards in the deck. It's a 1-drop and a black, so it's a 2-drop actually, a 1 and a black. It's a 1/2 flyer where target opponent reveals his hand. You can take an instant or sorcery card from it and put it under, exile it, and then when Freebooter dies, you can get it back. Really is able to take away a lot of removal that other decks may have, that sort of deal. It's pretty much gas in the Humans deck, one of the better cards in it. Otherwise, Thalia's Lieutenant and Champion of the Parish, just bump them up as big as you can, play a bunch of humans, violin a bunch of humans, and do your thing. Kind of an aggro style beatdown deck, Noble Hierarchs, that sort of deal. So 2 numbers I'm going to look at here is the actual percentage of the metagame. So humans had a 9.3% played, so just under 10. Pretty decent showing. Majority of decks kind of fall in the 3 to 7% range. The other number I want to look at is conversion rate. The average conversion rate, which means a deck going from day 1 and having enough wins to advance to day 2, was 63.1%. So that's kind of the baseline number to compare everything to. The conversion rate for humans was 67.4%. which is just slightly above that 63.1%. So it had a decent overall, just a solid showing. It wasn't too overpowered, although it was the only deck to have 2 players in the top 8. And some of the notable changes from the deck that we've seen recently was a lot of people started, playing Collected Company in the deck as an alternate way to get creatures on the board. You saw a couple of the decks run a couple copies of the Coco. And also a good sideboard card that a lot of people had was Dire Fleet Daredevil, which is the red Snapcaster Mage. It's a 2/1 first strike where you can cast an instant or sorcery out of the opponent's graveyard by paying its mana cost with any color. So 2 of the notable changes or improvements to that deck. Overall, the most played deck in the format, and had a really good showing all through day 1, all through day 2, and then top 8. Second most played deck was Affinity. No surprise there. It's been one of the most played decks in a tier 1 deck in the format for a long time now. It had 8% of the metagame, and its conversion rate was 64.9%. So basically just about average on the conversion. It didn't really put up in an outstanding showing or an overpowered showing. It was a pretty even, consistent deck, decent on day 1, decent on day 2, but it did not have any decks in the top 8. And one of the interesting changes or notes to Affinity was a couple people who were playing it actually splashed in the sideboard Bitter Blossom, which is the 2-drop enchantment where beginning of your upkeep you create a 1/1 black fairy and you lose 1 life. So that was an interesting thing to note. Not sure, I've never really seen an Affinity list with Bitter Blossom, so interesting to see that card included. Third most played deck is the deck that I play a lot, Burn. Particularly Boros Burn seemed to be the favorite version. 7.3% of the meta, so a pretty strong showing. Typically in like a Pro Tour event like this, or in a format where it's kind of wide open, you'll see a lot of people tend towards the aggro decks. In my personal opinion, I think Burn is in a tremendous spot right now. Its conversion rate was 64.7%, so roughly the same as Affinity. Not an outstanding showing. Didn't have any copies in the top 8, but really a consistent and strong showing on each day 1 and day 2. The big notes from Burn was basically Grim Lavamancer did some work in a lot of the matches from what was shown on streams and etc. Really good card. There was a time where I wasn't including Grim Lavamancer in my Burn decks, but I have started doing that recently. I like to do, a lot of people had 2 copies even in their main boards. And the one thing to note, like I said, Boros was the favorite Burn. There's actually one player who was playing the Artakas Command version, which I do still enjoy. My win rates with both of those different decks are roughly about the same. So Boros, I think, is definitely the tighter version, and the version where you take less damage off your own lands against opposing aggro decks, etc. Fourth most played deck was Green X Tron. So mono green Tron, green red Tron, green black Tron, green white Tron, etc. 6.9% of the metagame. Fairly decent showing. I think lately, over the past month or 2, Tron has gotten a nice rise in popularity. Used to see it for a while. It was down in like the 2 to 3% metagame range, and it's been constantly crawling up even through online results and everything. Tron is definitely one of the decks I play a lot too. I prefer Green Black Tron, in my opinion, is the best version. But however, from the Pro Tour, green or mono green Tron seemed to be the strongest, playing cards like Walking Ballista, a couple more Worm Coils than normal. So just a more kind of stronger, powerful, beatdown sort of Tron version. Not Eldrazi Tron, but you're still playing 4 Karms, 2 Ugins, Oblivion Stones, all that stuff. The conversion rate for Tron was fairly high, above average, even higher than humans, 68.8%, but it wasn't really an overpowered showing from the deck. A lot of people have thought that Tron was just going to overrun everything and be super good, and we might get a Tron land banning or something like that. I was actually pretty scared of that going into the Pro Tour, being someone who does play Tron a lot. It didn't happen, though. It's not overpowered at all, really. I don't think we'll see any bannings from Tron. The only card that I could really make an argument for, possibly, because of a couple of the other decks that it's played in, would be Ancient Stirrings, which I don't think it's strong enough to ban. So no copies of Tron in the top 8 either. And the breakout deck, like I said, was Mono Green Tron. Green-Black Tron was the second most played version of Tron, and Green-Red the third, and Green-White Tron pretty much non-existent right now. You don't see a lot of graveyard decks, Dredge, that sort of deal, which Green-White Tron was really good against. So yeah, Mono Green Tron and Green-Black Tron. The fifth most played deck was Grixis Death Shadow, 6.5% of the meta, and a 66.7 conversion rate. So also a pretty decent conversion rate. Slightly better than humans, but not as good as Tron. Good finishes overall. It was one of the top decks that had the best finishes, so a lot of top 16s, top 32s, etc. But it just didn't crack the top 8. There's actually a different version of Death Shadow in the top 8, which I'll talk about later. Actually, we'll talk a little bit about it now. Traverse Shadow, which includes Jund Shadow, Sultai Shadow, Esper Shadow. Basically, the versions that aren't playing as much blue. They play Mishra's Baubles and stuff like that. Traverse the Unwall to get a land or a creature. And that was the kind of the preferred version of Death Shadow, or basically the version. It wasn't preferred metagame-wise, but it was the deck that performed the best and had the best conversion rate out of the Shadow decks. Definitely a more impressive performance by the Jund Shadows and the Mishra Bauble Shadow decks. Sixth placed deck, or sixth highest meta deck, is Eldrazi Tron. Eldrazi Tron had really strong results, despite only being the sixth played. Had a 5.6% share in the meta. Its conversion rate, though, was insanely high at 76.9%. Put it as one of the highest conversion rate decks. So the highest amount of decks to make day 2 from day 1. So overall, a really strong performance for Eldrazi Tron. One of the best conversion rates for any of the decks. Moving on to deck number 7, it is Jeskai Control. I saw a lot of people recently playing more of a grindy Drago kind of control version of Jeskai, as opposed to the tap out version with Geist of St. Traft. There was a nice mix of both at the Pro Tour. I don't think one version is particularly better than the other version. I do really like the fact that the Geist deck can play 4 Spell Quellers, which is a really powerful card, especially in Modern. Jeskai Control, which I grouped the Jeskai, Geist decks, and the straight-up Control decks together, had a 5% share of the meta and a 73.9% conversion rate. The conversion rate is a little weird because the deck really, overall, didn't really perform that outstanding. It had a lot of its pilots that got to day 2, but once they got to day 2, it was one of the worst performing decks, not placing, very high finishes at all. So basically, it's a mix of numbers from the Pro Tour for Jeskai. I think out of the control decks, it might be the best deck. I still like Grixis Control a lot, and Corey Burkhardt had a really strong performance with Grixis Control. But Jeskai appears to be the control favored deck at the moment. Had a good conversion rate, yet poor 2-day results. So take kind of the numbers with a grain of salt on that one. The 8th metagame deck would be 5%, would be Storm. Really disappointing showing for Storm. Is another one of the decks I thought that if it did really well, maybe a piece would get banned. A lot of people were talking about that as well. Had 5% in the meta share, which is pretty average, not terrible, but the conversion rate was really low, 56.5%. Basically, one of the only top or better decks that had a really poor conversion rate compared to the average. So on day 2, it was very below average. And when looking at all the numbers as a whole and comparing them to each other between Storm and all the other decks, Storm just really had a horrible performance. And I guess if you were a Storm pilot, it's pretty good because you aren't going to see any bans from this. Storm was the deck where we saw, 25 people in day 2, or 3 or 4 Storm decks in the top 8 that Wizards would consider banning a piece. However, because of this poor showing at the Pro Tour, I don't think you will see a banning at all or anytime soon in regards to Storm. Now, rounding out the top decks, the 9th most played deck was Blue-White Control, also at 5%. So I'm just covering decks over 5% here. Had a decent conversion rate at 60.9%, slightly below average. It seems like the preferred control format or deck, as I stated, was Jeskai Control. But it had numbers very similar to Jeskai. Did okay in day 1. Day 2 and beyond, it was just pretty bad. In my opinion, it's just not strong enough. It has a lot of tools. It really needs a good pilot to figure out all the nuances of playing a blue-white control deck. Definitely more of a control or a hard control deck as opposed to the tap out kind of Jeskai style. Some other notes from the Pro Tour. We had 30 decks that had winning records. Pretty diverse there. It's not a format where standard where you see 2 or 3 decks have all the wins. Very strong. There's a lot of decks that were kind of up and coming decks that really proved themselves that they're totally legitimate and good decks to play. One of the other notes, the mid-range decks, particularly Jund, Abzan, are kind of the 2 traditional mid-range decks that people think of. You could also throw Sultai into there. Sure, you could play a Grixis or Jeskai mid-range or Delver decks. Pretty horrible showing, except they did have one Abzan deck in the top 8, which was Reduke. Not a surprise there. One of the best Magic players to ever play the game. Knows the deck really well and had some, just from watching a little bit of the stream coverage, had just some tremendous plays. It comes down to being an outstanding Magic player. He kind of even said he knew the deck wasn't really positioned well, but because how wide the format was, he basically wanted to go with something that he knew in the ins and outs of, and that's what it came down to. So it had one good performance. It only had like 2 Jund decks in total, and only one made day 2. Same with Abzan. You had like 3 or 4 decks made day 2, and then there was a lot of green black rock style decks. Really had a poor day 2 showing. You saw a lot of them on day 1, not many on day 2. Mardu Pyromancer was also a very bad deck. It's gotten a rise lately, especially on Magic Online. However, similar to Abzan, it had one player in the top 8, actually Jerry Thompson, which was in the finals. Did not win, but was in the finals nonetheless. However, all the other Mardu players really had a tough time. Didn't even have a good day 2 percentage or anything. So those are the 2 decks that basically come down to having outstanding players yet really are not well positioned right now. I think the mid-range decks, which Mardu is a mid-range deck, they're just horrible right now. Another very poor performance overall was combo decks. So you can basically boil down to the Pro Tour being aggro and control. Combo decks, Ad Nauseam, Storm, Living End, I guess Abzan Company, you can categorize that as a combo deck. Kiki Chord, Sahili Chord, all those had pretty poor results. Now, 2 of the breakout decks that were really interesting from this event were Black-Red Hollow One, which a number of the Japanese pros that were there played it. Actually had the highest conversion rate of any deck at 100%. So every deck that was day 1, Black-Red Hollow One, all the players made day 2. Because of that, you saw tremendous price spikes in the cards. Goblin Lore, which is a card where you draw 4, discard 3, that shot up in price from like $2 to like 15 or 16 bucks now. Pretty crazy. But the Hollow One deck, it looks pretty legit. There's been some black-red versions going around for a while, but I think these pros from Japan kind of fine-tuned the deck, and it's at where it needs to be right now. Ultimately, I think it's a really competitive event deck. I've seen it 5-0 a number of online events recently as well. And the big note there is the 100% conversion rate. Seems like just a really strong deck that not a lot of people are playing. I think after the Pro Tour, people are going to see how strong that deck really is. Another breakout deck was Madcap Moon, or essentially Blue-Red Moon, or traditionally called Blue Moon. You saw recently that they were moving to like a teamer kind of through the breach build where you had Emeralds in your hand. You cast through the breach, put an Emerald on the battlefield, and you win that way. However, this Blue Moon version, of course, namesake card Blood Moon, play 4 copies of those, play Madcap Experiment, which basically goes through your library and gets into a, what's the name of the card? Platinum Empyrean. It's an 8/8 artifact where you don't lose life, so it cancels out the Madcap Experiment, and you have an 8/8 artifact on the board. Had a really good showing. Had 4 of the 5 people playing actually make day 2, so it had like the second highest conversion rate as opposed to the Black-Red Hollow One. So 80% conversion rate is pretty damn good for the Pro Tour. Now, last thing to go over, of course, is the top 8 decks. Coming in 8th, or 5 through 8, we had 2 of the 5-color human decks, 1 Traverse Shadow deck, and 1 Abzan deck with Reduke. Coming in spots 3 and 4 was one of the black-red Hollow 1 decks, as I just talked about. And another interesting deck I saw, which was blue-red Pyromancer, had a really good showing. You only had, 1 or 2 people playing it. Essentially, it's a kind of a blue-red control version, almost like Blue Moon, but it plays 4 young Pyromancers, go wide, make a bunch of tokens. It also played 4 Thing in the Ice, get it to flip, bounce all the creatures, and get in with a 7/6 body. Also a good blocker in the early game. Thing in the Ice. It's a 0/4. It starts out as before it flips. And then number 2 again was Jerry Thompson with Mardu. So he had a really strong performance with Mardu, although the finals was very uneventful as the winner kind of steamrolled him, as he steamrolled kind of everyone on day 2, which is Luis Salvato playing Lantern Control. Lantern is a deck that a lot of people absolutely hate. Personally, I do not enjoy playing against it. I don't necessarily hate the deck. It's a lock control deck. It's very boring to play against. One of my local friends and local competitors plays Lantern Control. So I played against it a good amount of time. Usually I'm playing decks such as Burn, Tron, control decks and stuff that beat Lantern specifically, so I don't never have too much complaints against it. But another one of my buddies absolutely hates it. He'll scoop if he sees someone play a Lantern, etc. Just he doesn't want to play it at all. Doesn't want to deal with it. It's just not fun. Interactive match. It's not. Basically, you're locked out of the game and you just flip over a card one at a time, mill you. From my personal experience, I think Lantern's a cool deck. It's something that I would probably try out. And in fact, I am going to try it all on MTGO. I'm going to cover all the top 8 decks and kind of play all the best decks from the Pro Tour. Do leagues with them, see how they are, see if there's something I might want to pick up in paper. I now have the ability, thanks to a way to get cards on MTGO to play in leagues and stuff, to play all these sort of different modern decks and kind of figure out what's good. I have never really stuck to a deck, so I'm interested to go through a lot of the top Pro Tour decks and see if there's anything I really like. My thought is, out of all the decks in the top 8, I think I might like Lantern and the Blue-Red Pyromancer deck the best. So I'm looking forward to trying those. So I'm going to try to cover all the decks. So overall, the Pro Tour was very nice. I caught some of the stream on day 2. Didn't catch a lot of it on day 1. Basically just caught the top 8. That's about it. I do plan on going back and trying to watch as much footage as I can. Everyone should do that. It's good to learn from these pro players, especially see what they're doing in certain situations. Kind of sit down and watch and focus on it and analyze the play. I plan on doing that. I also plan on playing on a bunch of Magic Online leagues, trying out all these different decks, and seeing what decks are good and giving my own opinions on the decks. And basically what I'm saying to you is keep your eye out for more Pro Tour coverage. I want to really go through all these decks. I'm trying to become more of a competitive Magic player. We have a local Grand Prix coming up, which is Grand Prix Hartford, Connecticut. So if you guys are going to be out there, I'll be out there playing. I'm not sure what I'm bringing yet, but you guys will have to find out what I'm going to be playing. Hope to just get a breakout finish or something in a major event. So thank you all for watching. Hope this was kind of a long video. Yeah, 20 minutes or so. But I just wanted to go over the Pro Tour results, talk a little bit about the decks, give my personal opinion, and let you know I'll be trying to do maybe more style vlogs like this. I got a couple of Magic related products to review. I know I did a couple deck box reviews and stuff in the past, and I am trying to push out more League gameplay. However, currently with my schedule, I only get a couple times a week to actually sit down and play Magic Online. Mondays and Fridays I'm usually grinding local tournaments, even sometimes on Saturdays. Just a mix of balancing all my time and trying to do the other hobbies I enjoy, such as gaming and everything else. So thank you all very, very much for watching. If you stuck through the whole thing, I really, really appreciate it. And yeah, hope everyone enjoys this type of video, and we'll see you later. Peace out.